Hello, it's May 2022, and before I get into this video, at the time of recording this video, I hadn't had a shower in 3 weeks, and today I was able to, thank you to the kindness of someone. I really appreciate it. I feel like $1,000,000. And I just wanted to also segue for a moment into a lot of my videos. Most of these videos are pre-recorded. Sometimes they may be posted in the same day, but chances are they're pre-recorded. And the only exception are my update journey finding home videos, which are done in real time. I've had a few more people ask that, so I just thought I'd address that again. So there's a good chance that you're seeing this video down the road, and the exception being the update journey finding home videos, which are done in real time. Now, with that said, I'm going to be talking about something very, very serious, and for some it might even create emotion, especially for those people who were part of it. I had recently watched a video about the worldwide sex trafficking, specifically, for example, in Dubai. And there was also, as these videos populate, there was one story of a woman with child sex trafficking that it really hit home for me, and just to hear what she went through. Now, with this worldwide sex trafficking, it's never gonna go away. No one's ever gonna put a dent into it. It always has been and always will be. And listening to some of the stories of women who either voluntarily wanted to be a part of it because of the hype and the glamour and they like sex, to the ones that were forced to, say, picked up literally physically and dragged kicking and screaming. There's a group of women that fall in between those two categories, and those are the women that are promised something different, and by the time they, say, for example, reach a destination, the truth comes out and it's too late for them to turn back. They basically get trapped. And for anyone who's following my story and watched my older videos, will know a lot of this information, but I'm going to reiterate that these stories. Now, in 1997, the woman that I would end up marrying, it was 1997, it was like January, literally. The woman that I would end up marrying in December of 2016, just that week, just before New Year's Eve, had come to Canada under false pretenses. She was a registered nurse for sick kids and specialized in neurology, but I'm not going to get into her family dynamics, but she wanted to do something more, be something more special. And I had met her just after New Year's Eve. I'd come across her in a room in a corner, literally sitting on the floor crying. And at the time I was doing personal and private type of security, and so to me this was kind of like what's going on. And I had talked to her, and she just kept saying, I'm not supposed to be here, this is all wrong. And as we talked, she gave me a fake name, and something just stood out with me, like with her, just like, I don't know. And unfortunately she had a girlfriend with her. I couldn't help both of them. Long story short, I ended up being able to put her on a plane, send her back to Central Europe. Well, the agency found her, picked her up, and shipped her back. And I remember for about a day, I heard rumors, but I think part of me didn't want to accept that. And she ended up finding me in an establishment. She was wearing glasses. It was dark inside, and I remember just having this really weird feeling. And then she had come up behind me. I was sitting down, and she touched me on the shoulder. And I'll never forget, it was like slow motion for me. I turned and I just said, "What are you doing here?" And she said, "I was looking for you." So we began hanging out, and I pulled some strings, saved her from terrible fate. We ended up getting married, anyway. And then I ended up moving overseas to her country. And our cultures were relatively similar, pretty much the same, but in the language, because my family comes from Central Europe, we were very similar, so I was able to kind of cheat in the beginning, communicating until I learned that language. And it was during this time I was dealing with coming across information of some officials, Canadian officials in Canadian embassies over there, who knew what was going on. And the best way I can describe it is creating visas for these women to come here. And what happened with the woman that I married, as soon as she got here, they took her papers, took everything. She had nothing. She couldn't even prove who she was. And that's how some of these women get involved. Now, there's a lot of women, as I said, who voluntarily know what's happening and they're all for it. Some of these women will use the, I'm here against my will type of thing to get sympathy, to make more money perhaps, or whatever. And they just kind of piggyback off of that. But there are some women who are just like all for it, and bad things end up happening to them. Not all of them, a lot of them. And when I was listening to these stories about Dubai and these women, it just flooded me with a lot of memories from the late 1990s. And then what I ended up doing was sharing names of these individuals, for example, in the embassies and so forth. And just trying to, I was in my late 20s, like 29. Maybe I was a bit naive, thinking that, this is going to change something, but long story short, it ended up costing me her. And I shared what was it at the time, in 2020, I was given a 21-year-old letter, and I did a video about it, and I read a few excerpts and showed photos of this letter. And I remember before leaving in February 1999, we talked about encrypting, if we ever had to, letters or any communication. And 21 years too late, reaching out a lifetime ago. Now in 2011, I learned she was okay, and whatever happened to her, she wants to leave in the past, and I'm part of the past. I'm glad that she's okay. So yeah, watching that video and listening, it just like, yeah, and then names started popping into my head of these officials and stuff. There's some officials within Canada. And I've recently shared with different people, different names, just reiterating the story for whatever reason. And I was faxing, this is before the internet was really big, and I was faxing all this information around the world because no one in Canada was even listening to me for whatever reason. Kind of parallels what happened in Calgary, Alberta, but I digress. So yeah, I experienced that vicariously to the woman that I married. And when I had flown back to Canada in February 1999, it was months later that the agency picked her up and took her to a small country in Africa. That's all I knew at the time. I can only share what I know. And there was someone, I don't know how to put it. I can't prove anything, but I seen a few things that really supported the suspicion that there was someone, we'll just say, related to her that may have been involved. So, and I've shared in other videos, and I'm going to tell the story again, like when I was a child, being passed around sexually among adults. And I did confront my mother about this when I had thought I was reuniting with her in 2020. And before I even finished, I didn't know anything about it. I couldn't even finish what I was saying. I didn't know anything about it. And then I've shared stories with babysitters and stuff like that. And then I've shared just one video dedicated to this, how in my mid-teens I was rushed to the hospital for emergency surgery for an injury. And I was sexually assaulted by 5 to 6 female nurses in the recovery room. Spent almost a decade off and on trying to seek some sort of justice for that, but anyway, there's videos about that, and I mentioned this in other videos, but there is a video dedicated to that. And the irony being that my sexual assault complaints over those years show up on the police computer database in Canada known as CPIC, but not clear that I was a complainant. So there's this little history going on that these people who make uninformed conclusions and screw things up more than to get things right assume that I was a perpetrator, but I digress. And I've also shared stories where, again, in my mid to late teens, moved out when I was 17, and then I guess you can say I was being trafficked, and women would pay for me, buy me gifts and stuff like that. It never dawned on me until, like, the scope of what I had become, until one evening, and I shared that story in another video. And I realized, yeah, this is not me. And then, later, I was very sexually open, sex parties, all sorts of stuff, and had many women for many lifetimes. And I'm not saying that with pride, I'm just simply sharing. And I see part of that was probably based on trying to find love or something missing within me. And what I hope, that age, you're very easily groomed into it and all the hype. So I have that firsthand experience from when I was a child and as a teenager, a young adult. in my life, being drugged by women and stuff. And I mentioned how the last relationship that I was in was with the woman that I married. And I haven't been with a woman since. It's been that long. I've messed around a handful of times, nothing serious over the decades, and that for me started because I was married. I didn't know what happened to her. I was loyal. And say about a decade later, when I find out that she's okay, or over a decade later, 2011. By now, it's just become part of me. But I remember in 2000, it was summer 2011, 2012 rolls, and I'm like, okay, I have closure to that chapter of my story, of my life, and move on. If maybe if somebody comes along. And then my nightmare began in 2012 in the city of Calgary, learning what I learned about the sexual abuse, trafficking of these vulnerable women. And as I mentioned in other videos, there seems to be this theme in my life, but whatever. And over the years, as I said, I haven't been with a woman, and I'm not boasting, but I've rejected many women, and I've said in older videos, more with like the men's rights stuff, women become really crazy, or can, not all, but usually I find they just become really crazy when they're rejected, whether they reject sex or relationship. They just, I forget what the old saying is about the wrath of a woman, but it's very true. But then I uncovered this out here, and then this went sideways when two former police officers decided to do street justice on behalf of this female, and they make up this whole story to cover their butts because they had beaten me to the point where left me partly disabled, and no one wanted to be accountable. And then, well, there's tons of videos about how all that unfolded. Destroyed my life. And it appears that this female, because I was reluctant to help, I helped by telling her and a few others what they need to do. I can't do it. I'm nobody. And I don't know who or what set up this false allegation, but I did have an email from my second lawyer several months after I fired him, saying it appears that she lost her temper with me, and that's how everything unfolded. Because I wouldn't actually step up and be the front person, try to help them. And it's interesting, I'm just going to segue for a moment. And I'm not the only person saying this, but how many times law enforcement, they create cold trails because they end up either one, ignoring doing anything in the beginning. For example, with my sexual assault complaints against these nurses, or they start going after the wrong person, which usually leads to wrongful convictions. And by the time they realize, oh, we got the wrong person, and I've talked about people being incarcerated for 10, 20, 30 years wrongfully. Well, good luck trying to figure out the case from that. These people just make stuff up, and society just buys into, oh, these people are professionals or something. As soon as you have a position of authority, you're more human than human. And I've talked about that. This is the world that we live in, right? And I've said this repeatedly. It's unfortunate. So a lot of society focuses on mostly women being trafficked, but there's also young boys, especially young boys, and men. And the same applies for men. There are men who go into it knowing when they're older, they realize, okay, there's young adults who don't see it coming. They're groomed. And I think that's what really initially hurt me the most with what happened in Calgary, Alberta, was my being accused of these things that were actually done to me throughout my life, and then my trying to help and expose and whatever. I was being accused of things that I was against. Now, I know there's a lot of people, and I've highlighted this, who, for example, the worst offenders of the various different crimes and moral acts and stuff are the ones that scream the most. I never screamed about this stuff until what happened to me in Calgary, Alberta, when it became police, judicial, and political corruption, political interference. Should have known better. But men and boys are just as much a part of it, the sex trafficking, being victims of it, if you want to call it as a descriptive. And I think, though, with women, well, women with feminism makes a big issue out of nothing to begin with. But on a biological perspective, women, we all come from women. They give us our babies. They create our future. And the fact that every time they have sex with a man, their biology is designed to absorb DNA from the male. And if you don't understand how that works, there's books, I'm sure, that talk about the birds and the bees, right? So, when you look throughout history, it looks like that's why female virginity is very prized, because they're not, as a very loose descriptive, contaminated by other male genes, and it's found in their soft tissue during autopsies. And I've mentioned this in a couple of videos in more detail, how scientists are like, yeah, this is what's happening. We don't see the same with males who have, say, for example, multiple partners, because males are not designed to receive genetic material, whereas women are. But anyway, that's going way off on a tangent. But yeah, males are, as a descriptive, victims of this. And I can speak firsthand from my childhood experiences. I've shared some details of a few videos. Being sexually assaulted and selling, being trafficked, being groomed into that world, and having the woman that I married, and then whatever I know about what happened in the city of Calgary, Alberta. So I just really want to skim over all the topics that I've mentioned here for whatever they're worth. It's very, the people who are behind this are untouchable. Nothing's going to change, and nobody fears anything. Like even police, judicial, and political corruption, they're not scared of the people. And I see so many people, the elites or whatever, the Illuminatis, they're running scared. No, they're not scared. No repercussions. This is going to go on till the end of time. This sad world we live in. So perhaps, if nothing else, I'm just giving more awareness to this. Not that I ever thought that I'd change the world or anything. Nobody. And create awareness also for the men who find themselves victims of this. And I'm also going to briefly segue to males also being victims of domestic violence. And I've talked about this in a video where, for example, sex with prepubescent children, young adult teenagers, domestic violence, murder of spouses, and everything else are actually more common for women to be the perpetrators. And you can look up, for example, the NISVS, the CDC, Scientific America. There's a lot of other studies showing this. But regardless of male or female, we're still talking about 1 or 2% of the population, but it's just, all hyped up. And we hear about these celebrity cases where, the name just popped out of my head. She's being tried for, in jail right now for the island, sex trafficking. That little island thing is not even a pin drop in the bucket of what's going on in the world. And I briefly mentioned at the beginning, there was a woman that she was telling her story of being trafficked as a child and how she was put. And I guess some of these people, they enjoy murdering children before, during, or after sex, like whatever. And how she was put on the butcher block, and it was blood stained. It was all black because when the blood dries and over time it turns black. She was describing it in detail, and she thought she was going to die, but somebody liked her, and she ended up surviving that, emotionally scarred for life. Apparently, she went on. She's an adult. She was talking. She's married, has children and stuff, but she lives with that her whole life. And I think she hinted at she has physical scars too. But just to feel and see that emotion. This is the world we live in. And for my efforts with, for example, the woman that I married, cost me her. I rebuilt my life, moved on, but my efforts in the city of Calgary, Alberta, completely destroyed me. Criminal record, partly disabled, I'm older, I have post-traumatic stress, other health issues, and ties in with being older. As we age, that oomph within us starts to tone down. Anyway, this video I know is going to probably end up being, I don't know how long this video is, but hopefully you made it this far to the end. And yeah. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share.